Okay, welcome to the class today. Today I'm switching gears a little bit. I want to speak about something that's been really on my mind a lot lately, and it's this idea of modern day rites of passage, most notably psychedelic rites of passage. And I think this has been influenced by the fact that I live here in the Sacred Valley, and the Sacred Valley is a real kind of global meeting place for spiritual seekers. It's a place where people come. Seeking after some sort of 21st century rite of passage. And they come from all over the world. And the one thing that it seems to be the common bond that unites most of the people that come here, actually, as far as I can tell, is psychedelics. People seeking after not just like any type of rite of passage, but specifically psychedelic rites of passage. So I want to kind of analyze this whole culture today. And in order to analyze it and understand it, I want to dig into a little bit of what we've been covering in past classes, which is like the esoteric history of rites of passage. And, as you know, those who've been coming to a lot of classes know, like I traced this back like 12,000 years, kind of tracing the history of rites of passage for 12,000 years, but specifically the last 2,000 years in rites of passage. And this will help us understand the predicament that we find ourselves in today, and will also give us tools of discernment, specifically tools of discernment to understand what's happening in this whole subculture, what's happening in this scene, and what's happening specifically here, where people come from all over the world seeking psychedelic initiation into something. Into what? Something. People don't even know when they come here. They just know they want a shaman to give them ayahuasca and initiate them into something. And so they come on a trip and they seek out retreats. So one of the things I really want to talk about is this whole culture, this emerging culture, which is not that old. It's maybe about 20 years old. This emerging culture of medicine retreats. And to really put that in the context of a larger historical view of like, these are actually continuations of an impulse that's thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. And so when we understand the phenomenon of medicine retreats in its esoteric historical context, we can start to gain more tools of discernment about what's going well in this culture, what's going not so well in this culture, what's precious and great and beautiful in this culture, and what's dangerous and not so beautiful in this culture. Because something that is coming up in this culture too is this issue of like rites of passage and initiation specifically for Westerners, because it's specifically Westerners that are really seeking out these medicine retreats. Medicine retreats is particularly a thing for Westerners. So going into this idea, like what calls people to seek out, why do people come to the Sacred Valley? Why do people go to Costa Rica and shell out lots of money for an ayahuasca retreat? Why do people go to Mexico, go to the Amazon? Why do people Westerners specifically, go to such lengths to go and seek out a shaman in the Amazon and drink ayahuasca? Well, if we understand that this phenomenon of psychedelic initiation has been happening for many, 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 many thousands of years, and we can understand it, and if we entertain this idea of reincarnation, and this idea that people are continually seeking out initiation in a lot of the same ways that it's already been done. So people growing up maybe in a mainstream Christianity, or maybe growing up in a household of atheists or scientific materialists or agnostics. Maybe they were growing up in a Christian household and they were indoctrinated into some sort of church Christianity at an early age. And then in their teenage years, they kind of rebelled against that because it didn't have any sort of mystical substance to it for them. And so they went on a period of, this is a typical journey, like a period of agnosticism. And then everything changes the first time that you take mushrooms, let's say. So just a quick survey here. How many people here have had psilocybin mushrooms before? You haven't had psilocybin mushrooms before? I'm not doing my job right.
Andrew, could you do one step further? Take a survey of how many people came here just to do?
Sure, that's a good idea.
I'm curious.
How many people came here with the intention of doing some sort of psychedelic work? You came here just to get away. Who's here on a kind of economic refugee status? Okay. Okay.
I trust the plant medicine.
So I've heard like five kind of themes here. Okay, this idea of a void, and then psychedelics appear, or plant medicine you could call them, or entheogens is the word I like to use. They appear as somehow related to filling this void. The other thing I've heard is about healing, especially healing trauma that is built up over the past. Another theme is excavating and going into things that have been inherited by ancestors. Another thing I've heard is kind of radical change in your whole orientation of life, like a kind of death and rebirth process, initiation process. And another thing I've heard is actually like deeply existential issues, like preparing for death and facing mortality. So all of these themes are what gets dealt with specifically in Rites of Passage. But if you ask most Westerners, hey, like when did psychedelics start being used in Western civilization? What do you think most people would say? The 70s, right? 70s. Yeah. LSD, right? Movement. Okay. What if I told you that psychedelics have been used uninterruptedly for thousands of years? Sure. Okay. More than thousands. I mean, like this is kind of like a secret esoteric nugget of knowledge here that I speak about a lot, is because one of the things that I specialize in is teaching about esoteric history, hidden history, secret history. And so if you look at like what are the roots of Western civilization, how far do we trace it back? We can trace it back to, well, the beginning of Roman churchianity maybe, but you can go further than that, say Greek civilization. But then you can go further back and say, well, we kind of got the torch of civilization from ancient Egypt. It passed on to Greece. And then if you go back, well, where does ancient Egypt get that torch from? This gets into really esoteric territory that you can't really find out about on Wikipedia. It gets into like alternative histories, like this idea of Atlantis and the lost civilization. So something that's common in esoteric spiritual history is this idea of an unbroken, uninterrupted chain from Atlantis right up to the present. And so in order to do this kind of investigative history, we kind of trace through underground hidden channels. But one thing that's common in all these underground hidden channels is this teaching of that the foundation of all civilizations is mystery schools. And not just mystery schools, but spiritual masters, like you could call them bodhisattvas or great spiritual leaders that bring a new religion. So each civilization that we trace back, so like ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, ancient Persia, even ancient India, if you really want to get into like the origins, like where did these civilizations come from? If you're really embracing the esoteric investigation, this leads back to certain individuals like prophets, like in Judaism as well with Moses and Abraham. This traces back to prophets and this idea that these prophets were actually taking psychedelics. And that these mystery schools, like Egypt had a mystery school for thousands of years. Greece had a mystery school for thousands of years. Like uninterrupted. The Eleusinian mystery school of ancient Greece was 2,000 years uninterrupted. The mysteries in ancient Egypt, thousands of years. It could be 4,000 years for all I know. Nobody really knows much about the early histories of Egypt because for all we know, like Egypt, what we call Egypt today is just a kind of like Atlantean colony that got repopulated and people lost certain amount of knowledge about Atlantis, but so it's hard to trace like where the actual origins of ancient Egypt is.
But they're still here, no? Because they have obelisks all over the world, like in Rome, like in Washington.
I mean, this gets into like alternative and fascinating esoteric archaeology, where we can see that actually stonework in Ollantaytambo shows evidence of being the same stonework as in the insides of the Great Pyramids in Giza. So it looks as though whoever built the Great Pyramids of Giza are also the people that built the most impressive sites in the Sacred Valley. Okay. So anyway, it gets a little murky when we want to dive into like the origins of ancient Egypt, for example. But the point of the story is that they had these mystery schools, and these mystery schools were so important. They were like basically the focus, the most important thing for the whole civilization, that they built so many temples and sites to honor it and sites to house it. Like the initiations in these mystery schools took place in the most sacred places. In some cases, they would build like monumental pyramids with just a chamber in the center, and the initiations would take place in these chambers. So this is a very serious thing, taken very, very seriously. And if it was going on in an unbroken chain for thousands of years, then there's something really to investigate there. So the thing to really understand about this is to put the medicine retreat culture that we're seeing now explode in the world, put this into a multi-thousand year historical context. This is just a re-emerging of the impulse of the mysteries, the mystery schools. So the mystery schools, like the very name implies that there's something mysterious about it. Well, one of the main mysteries of the mystery school was the secret of the entheogenic sacrament. So a real mystery school, a true mystery school, uses an entheogenic psychedelic sacrament to bring about the initiation. The whole purpose of the mystery school is to initiate the human being. So what does that mean, to initiate the human being? In a nutshell, it means something along the lines of a shamanic initiation. The human being gets initiated into the mysteries of the spiritual world. In order to be initiated into the mysteries of the spiritual world, the human being has to go through some sort of death and rebirth process. That's why these initiations always took place in tombs, in caves, underground, in dark places that mimic the interior of the earth. So the idea is that the candidate for initiation, and this is a common feature in all mystery traditions, the initiate has to go sort of underground or in the tomb and go through a death. And this death was a necessary prerequisite in order to go through a spiritual rebirth, where the candidate is reborn into the realities of the eternal life of the soul. And this is why in the Greek mysteries they say, like, what was the phrase? They said, you need to die in order to, I can't remember the phrase. You need to die in order to give birth to your eternal life, or something like that. But this idea, this kind of code language for the mysteries, that if you really want to know and spark and awaken the mysteries of your eternal life, the eternal life of the soul, you need to go through this initiation process. And this initiation process actually does something inside your higher bodies. It makes a sort of important change inside of you, so that you now become fully conscious of the part of yourself that's immortal. You become actually conscious of the spiritual world. It's not just a blind faith belief anymore. Like Christians who go to church every Sunday, they're placing so much faith in this idea of heaven. After they die, they're going to go to heaven. That is like a product of people that have been deprived of gnosis and deprived of initiation, so that they don't actually know it from their own experience, and they have to believe it conceptually. So the mysteries gone on uninterrupted for thousands and thousands of years, and those who distinguished themselves as being spiritually mature enough were selected for initiation. For many thousands of years, it was a very elite thing. You had to be chosen for initiation, tapped. And then when you were tapped, you needed to be prepared. You were put on a probationary period for years. Maybe you had to, in certain cases, you had to go vegetarian, stop eating meat. You had to be celibate, perhaps. You had to do like purifications for a long time. You needed a certain preparatory education. This preparatory education was really important. First of all, to weed out those that weren't ready, and also to really prepare the candidates so that they could actually accomplish the initiation successfully. Because there's this idea that if the person isn't prepared properly, the initiation can result in a miscarriage. Something bad can happen. There's also this idea that it's a dangerous process if not carried out correctly, and it needs the guidance of high initiates, highly trained hierophants and initiates that can guide the process, elders. So this opens up another consideration we're going to get to towards the end of the class, about like what happens when you try to do psychedelic rites of passage without proper preparation and without proper elderhood. So the story goes that, like, okay, unbroken chain of this very secretive tradition of initiating people into the spirit world, initiating people into the mysteries of their divine self, and the part of them that's immortal, that doesn't die with the death of the body, but that carries on. But then the story gets really interesting when you start to study the last 2,000 years and the rise of the Roman Church. Because the Roman Church was this body that arose. And if you understand like the esoteric history, you can see that, okay, ancient Egypt, lots of psychedelic mystery traditions. They passed on their knowledge to ancient Greece. Ancient Greece and ancient Egypt had these mystery traditions. But then what arose out of that was like the Essenes and early Christianity. And then if you dive into esoteric history, you can also discover, wow, this is also the case for esoteric Judaism and esoteric Christianity. They also use psychedelics as well, just like all the other mystery traditions. So there were psychedelic mystery rites in Christianity, especially early Christianity. Then you look at the story of the rise of the Roman Catholic Church. And then if you understand the esoteric background, like, yes, of course, originally Christianity had these psychedelic mysteries in it. Judaism had psychedelic mysteries. If you read between the lines about Moses, it says Moses was initiated in Egypt. Or Moses was educated in Egypt. if you know that educated in Egypt means initiated into the Egyptian mysteries, and you know that Egyptian mysteries are full of psychedelics, then you know, okay, so Moses was psychedelically initiated. And then you read the chapter in Exodus where he goes and receives the Ten Commandments, and you're like, I think Moses was tripping when he received these things, you know? And then you read the passage of the manna in the wilderness, and you're like, I think they're talking about mushrooms. Oh my God. You know, and then you read about how the Ark of the Covenant was made out of acacia wood. And if you know a little bit about Egyptian mysteries, you know that Osiris was born out of the acacia tree. And if you know a little bit about ethnobotany, you know that the acacia tree has massive amounts of DMT in it. So like, okay, so the Ark of the Covenant was made out of a wood that has massive amounts of DMT in it. Okay, so you start to see the clues. Like, okay, Moses was psychedelically initiated. That has huge implications for the Hebrew mysteries. And then you think, then you really want to get trippy. You start thinking about the famous episode of the Lord's Supper, when he gives the bread and the wine, and he says, this is my body, this is my blood. Drink this, eat this in memory of me. And if you take this esoteric context, and you're like, maybe it's not just like wheat bread and fermented grape juice. Maybe they're actually referring to a mystery. Maybe they're referring to something psychedelic. So if you take the psychedelic hypothesis of the Lord's Supper, and then you look at the history of Christianity and look at the rise of the Roman Church, suddenly the story shifts. Suddenly the story becomes this egregore that was created by these like diabolical Roman emperors, sort of took over the whole movement and then kind of gutted it of all of its esoteric mystery wisdom. And like soon after it took over the impulse of original Christianity, it waged war against the Gnostics, the Gnosis. The Gnostics are like people that were tripping, right? And so it wages war against the Gnostics. It starts declaring Gnosticism as heresy. It also wages war against the pagan Greek mysteries. Like for 2,000 years, the Eleusinian mysteries was a psychedelic mystery cult. And in the end of the 300s, Emperor Theodosius closed the mysteries. He forbade them. He made them illegal, and he closed them, destroyed them. Why would he do that? Right after that, like end of 300s, right into the beginning of the 400s, the Roman emperors started to destroy the pagan temples, started to destroy the Library of Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria contained many tens and tens of thousands of handwritten scrolls. That was the result of the wisdom that people gained from all of these mystery schools, the wisdom that people can tap into when they get initiated. All of this pre-Christian wisdom that came from thousands of years of mystery schools and psychedelic initiation rituals was burned and destroyed. So you can start to see there's an actual impulse to obliterate and cut off, like snip, 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 cut off this unbroken lineage of psychedelically inspired wisdom and initiation rites. You got a question?
Yeah, more like I want to share like my conspiracy is that they even took it to the Vatican. They don't burn the library, it's a building, but all the information.
Well, this is correct. Yeah, this is correct. Actually, I don't want to. I've given lots of lectures that go into like the black magic of the Roman Church, and like I'm not going to sort of go there right now, but yes, in a nutshell, absolutely. Not only did they suppress it, but they stole it in order to exploit it for power. A quick little blurb that I've repeated a number of times, I never tire of repeating, is if you look at St. Peter's Basilica, the Vatican, the main spiritual center of the Vatican, there are 12 mushrooms around the dome of the central cross, which you can see. It's in plain sight. 12 mushrooms right around the central cross. In the entrance, in the main area where they do the masses, there's this entrance into St. Peter's tomb, right? The foundation stone of the whole Roman Church, St. Peter's tomb. On the stairway leading down into the tomb, there's all these mushrooms, like in brass, all these brass mushrooms. The floor plan for the whole basilica is a mushroom shape. The whole priestly garments, the garments of the cardinals, is a wink to Amanita muscaria symbolism. The caps that the cardinals wear, the red caps, there's a special stand where the cardinals put their caps during ceremony, and it's called the fungolino, which is Italian for the little fungus. And when they put and it's shaped like a mushroom, but when they put their red cap on it, it looks just like an Amanita mushroom. Okay, so it's a big thing hidden in plain sight. And this thing is a kind of black magic strategy to hide knowledge in plain sight, but to somehow deprive the people of it while throwing it in their face. And so that you're still kind of gaining power from the truth of it. Like the fact that the priests dress as mushrooms. Because what happened was the priests took the place of the psychedelic sacrament. The psychedelic sacrament is the intermediary between the human and the God. It's the mediation between the human and the spirit world, the human and the gnosis that was at the foundation of Christianity, the Christic gnosis. So it was always the sacrament that was meant to bring the person into direct communion with the Christic spirit. The priest just took the mushroom away and put themselves in place of the mushroom and said, I'm the mushroom now. You have to eat me, basically, if you want to connect to Christ. And so in that way, they were able to harness all this power by taking the place of the entheogen.
Andrew, I'm not trying to get you sidetracked, but don't you suppose that there's some things in the Vatican that could expose things? Like, why haven't they destroyed all that knowledge there?
Because they're using it to exploit it. It's a treasure chest of power for them that they're hoarding. Like, my precious, they're hoarding it. Okay, it's like knowledge. This knowledge is meant to be shared, right? It's meant to be proclaimed. It's meant to be given to all of humanity. So by hoarding it, they're actually like able to gain power from it. You know, there's a certain like sort of spiritual inversion that they can do when knowledge is meant to be given out, and instead they hoard it. They can actually cultivate a lot of occult powers, and also prevent it from reaching the world. But yeah, I'm sure the Vatican Library has everything. I'm sure, like.
And they have like this huge pine cone, no? That's called.
Oh, that's the other thing. In the plazas, in the plaza, which is in if you look at the overview of the whole layout, that plaza is the actual mushroom cap, and in two places there are these fountains, and the fountains are mushrooms. The fountains look exactly like mushrooms, and there's a pine cone, which is another symbol for initiation. So they took all of the symbols. They took the sacrament. They took all of these thousands and thousands of years of built up initiation rituals, and they hoarded it while simultaneously depriving the people of it, and then indoctrinating all of Western civilization into this form of initiation ritual without the actual sacrament that brings about the real initiation. So this is like a magical black magic masterpiece that's at the foundation of Western civilization.
Pine cone represents the pineal gland, as I can understand.
It's a multiple valence symbol. So it represents the pineal gland. It also represents the mushroom too, because mushrooms could actually grow out of pine cones. It's basically a representative of the thing that opens up the gnosis. It's a representative of the gnosis, however you want to represent it. Like same thing in Egypt with the Ankh. You know the Ankh? There's lots of iconography in the initiation temples where they did the initiation rites of the goddess with cow horns. Where does psilocybin grow? It grows on cow dung. So the goddess always had cow horns, and she's giving the Ankh into the mouth of the initiate. So they're eating Ankhs. So you can say, well, the Ankh represents the mushroom, but then other symbolic experts would say, well, it represents eternal life. But the mushroom brings about the initiation, which brings people knowledge of eternal life. So you can say that the mushroom does represent eternal life in a way. So this is a really important thing to understand about how Western civilization developed. It was developed based on a very diabolical concealment and hijacking of rites of passage, of these mystery traditions, of these entheogenic psychedelic initiations into the mysteries of the cosmos, the mysteries of God, the mysteries of existence. So this initiates the kind of dark ages. And then there's this whole fascinating story about how the psychedelic knowledge adapted to being suppressed. It like went underground. It spread into the Arabic civilization through alchemy, through Hermeticism. It survived through Hermeticism. It thrived in the Arab civilization for 400 years. And then it made its way back into Europe through Arabic Spain, you know, when they were fighting for the Iberian Peninsula. There was 700 years of war between Christians and Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula. And one of the only good things that came out of that was the Hermetic knowledge, the psychedelic knowledge. It passed back into Europe by way of that conflict. Then there's this whole story of the Renaissance where this knowledge went underground. And the problem is that this knowledge went underground. It became very exploitable, no longer by the Catholic Church. It became exploitable by the secret societies that emerged. So now there's this whole other story in studying the esoteric history of Western civilization that the knowledge went underground throughout all the medieval period. It survived underground, but then when it reemerged, it gave the impulse because it was the Catholic Church was so powerful It was so dangerous. It had started the Inquisition. It was now like murdering people that had esoteric knowledge, persecuting them as witches and sorcerers and heretics. So the knowledge was so persecuted that it gave rise to this phenomenon of secret societies. But the problem with that is that when you have a traumatic response to a trauma, darkness can enter into the traumatic response to the trauma. So the whole phenomenon of secret societies was a traumatized response out of to compensate for the genocidal persecution of this impulse. And so a real darkness crept into the impulse of Western secret societies because they needed to become really powerful, right? Because they were up against this huge, powerful church body that was hunting them. So it's like we have to become really powerful in order to defend ourselves, in order to grow, in order to overcome our enemy. And so what crept into the whole phenomenon of Western secret societies is this power impulse. And it was very, within a couple hundred years, was able to be corrupted. So you have the impulses of initiation, first of all, getting cut off, suppressed, surviving in secret, being persecuted. But then when it emerges in a very hostile atmosphere, and it emerges in a way that allows even that response to be corrupted. So now we have like the reintroduction of like mystery knowledge, esoteric knowledge, occultism, rites of passage, initiation rites being reintroduced to Western civilization. But what does that lead to? That leads to secret societies that end up developing ideals of like taking over the world and becoming like basically conquering the whole world, you know? And so this in a nutshell is the situation that Westerners find themselves in today, where most people do not have access to psychedelic rites of passage when they're growing up. They grow up in Western civilization in the 20th and 21st centuries. Western civilization has been characterized by the onslaught of materialism, the new technologies that comes through TV and screens and things like that, new possibilities of indoctrination, programming. The religion of science, the advent of scientific materialism, the whole story now, like we used to have a story about our divine origins. Now thanks to science, we've discovered, guess what? That's all just hocus pocus. And actually the truth is there's a big bang. And we're just like kind of like cosmic dust assembling itself into solar systems. And we're just a kind of like product of a cosmic accident and actually the real meaning of the evolution of humanity. It's not guided by spiritual forces, it's guided by natural selection, kill or be killed. And like this survival of the fittest. So this is a doctrine that comes out of a new religion. And this doctrine is breeding nihilism. It breeds a kind of like anti-spiritual culture. So that just lays the foundation for layering further and further phenomenon to come into the world. So now we're living in the 21st century and we've had like an accumulation of like a really like an empty void that is left by what originally the Roman Church did, was they cut us off from the gnosis. That leads to a complete like disconnection from the divine mysteries in the world, in the cosmos, and in ourselves. And it basically eliminates communion with one another and communion with God. Because the sacrament was always like the source of the communion. It's what allows people to actually unite, the real union. So naturally, people now in the 20th, 21st centuries, they grow up with a kind of default existential crisis. Like, what's the purpose? What's the meaning? Like, what do I do? Like this religion that my parents indoctrinated me into, it feels empty. I start to believe in science for a while. I say, okay, it's all about science. Science is solving the fantasies of religion. Okay. And then you get really empty with that. You get almost an existential despair with that. You start to believe and you start to try to solve the age old riddle. What happens after I die? Like, how do I prepare for my mortality? Right. And like, you don't have any answers. You have only dread. And so when you have only dread, what do? You start drinking. You start getting into drugs. You start like getting into all sorts of stuff that degenerates your soul to escape from the fear. And so like so much of Western civilization is just like built upon avoiding and denying this idea that like we have this one life and then when we die, that's it, oblivion. So we might as well enjoy our life as much as we can while we're living. We can have orgies and do whatever we want and it's all good. We're just enjoying our life because we have this one life to live and that's it. And there's no meaning. There's no such thing as karma. There's no such thing as like caring for the state of our soul, because after we die, like we have to face what we've done with our soul. That concept has been eliminated. Another thing that the church eliminated, in addition to knowledge of like the sacraments, about the mysteries, they also eliminated this idea of karma and reincarnation. And when you eliminate the idea of karma and reincarnation, you can really, really distort the central teaching of Christianity, which is the teaching of redemption and salvation. If you get rid of this idea that you have multiple lives, that you reincarnate into physical bodies, then suddenly the doctrine of redemption and salvation becomes this distorted, fanatical idea. Like the implication is, okay, you have this one life to live. You either make it or you go to hell. Forever. For eternity. You either accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior and go straight to the pearly gates, or you're done. You blew it. You go to hell.
And God loves you.
Yeah, that's really confusing, isn't
That's
it?
George
Yeah.
Carlin.
And don't forget,
Yeah.
God loves you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very confusing, right? And so what does that do? That breeds a kind of fanaticism. That breeds a proselytizing fanaticism. Like imagine if you believe this fully. You have this one life to live, and you either achieve salvation or damnation, and you've accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. So you're going to go try to indoctrinate your whole family, all your friends. You're going to have this fervor to go out on the streets and try to indoctrinate strangers, because it breeds this zealotry, this fanaticism so intensely. Okay, if you entertain this idea, a much more esoteric idea of reincarnation, which was a part of the original Christian teachings. I mean, Jesus Christ says in the recorded Gospels that John the Baptist is a reincarnation of Elijah. Like he's saying right there, humans reincarnate. Like he says, Elijah has returned. So right there, he's saying human beings reincarnate. But for some reason, the church, got rid of that teaching. So, but if you reintroduce this idea of reincarnation into the whole doctrine of redemption, salvation, suddenly it becomes a much more accessible idea. This idea that the work that you do on your soul, you can either like heal your soul or damage your soul. You can illuminate it or darken it. You can rip it to shreds. It can be ripped to shreds through trauma. It can be fragmented and ripped apart, or it can be healed and reassembled. And the work that you do in any given lifetime, it carries on into your future lifetimes. And there's this idea that you can actually re-inherit all of the good initiation work that you've done, all of the healing work that you've done. But you can also re-inherit all the damage that you've done. Let's say you got into black magic in a past lifetime. You made a bunch of deals with devils in a past lifetime. You reincarnated in this lifetime. Guess who's going to come knocking at your door when you hit puberty? It's going to be like this idea that like the things you've done in past lifetimes can return to you in this lifetime. Return to you for a good purpose. Return to you for the hope of improving the situation, evolving, illuminating, redeeming. This idea that redeeming is just like turning all the mistakes you made into blessings, reversing all of these things you've done. Suddenly the idea of redemption becomes a much more empowering idea. It becomes like this alchemical idea. Like you have your higher bodies, and your higher bodies are the subject of your work. And the results of the work that you do stay with you. And so, and the thing that confronts you in any given life is your karma. But if you do this work of healing, of soul retrieval, of illumination, of redeeming all of the damage done to your higher bodies, you can actually build what the alchemists call your immortal bodies or your higher bodies. You do this magical alchemy where your higher bodies gradually become more and more permanent, more and more what you could call immortal. So this is the work and doctrine of alchemy. And if you understand like where alchemy comes from the secret esoteric channels of Western civilization. This is the mystery knowledge that evolved from the Egyptian mysteries, from the Greek mysteries, from the early Christian mysteries, and it evolved into the secret societies of the Rosicrucians. And the Rosicrucians were like the secret mushroom-eating Christians, the secret Christian shamans that were like fighting against the church, and they were getting really powerful because they wanted to fight against the church. And so this knowledge of alchemy is really Western civilization's continued wisdom from the mysteries. So the Roman Church was not able to totally destroy it. It persisted in secret. So when you ask Westerners, when did psychedelics like really come into Western civilization? Like I said, like you would say, oh, LSD in the 70s, right? No, it was actually always been there, but it's been secret, and it's always stayed secret. And so this brings us to this issue now of modern day rites of passage. Westerners grow up in the 20th and 21st centuries, and they feel this void. They've inherited this void, this like meaninglessness that has the result of what traces back to the Roman Church, like doing this kind of like black magic operation. So we're seeing like the accumulated karma of that. And when we're born into that accumulated karma, we have a crisis. Anybody that has a spiritual spark in their soul, and if they have this spiritual spark in their soul, it's because they lighted that spark in past lifetimes. So if you've been involved in initiation work in past lifetimes in ancient Egypt or early Christianity or the Renaissance Rosicrucian occultism, if you were an alchemist in a past lifetime or a shaman somewhere in Siberia in a past lifetime, if you have this kind of spiritual spark, then you can almost be guaranteed to go through a crisis sometime in your 20s in this lifetime, because that spiritual spark is like, it's such odds with the meaninglessness that you find yourself in, with the economic economic nightmare that you're born into, or the decadent, meaningless, like anti-spiritual culture that you're born into. And that spark that's in you that you've earned from initiation in past lifetimes, that starts to awaken in you. And when it awakens in you, it tears your whole world apart. You have a complete breakdown. You're like, there's no meaning. This is meaningless. I need to find my meaning. Like, and you know, deep, deep, deep in your soul, you know that there's something for you to find. And so you become a really ardent seeker. After you have a total breakdown, maybe you get really sick. Maybe you've been like drinking and chasing tail, and like end up getting really sick, or you end up getting severely depressed. And then maybe you get severely depressed, and because you're raised in a kind of psychiatric materialism, you go on medication, and then the medication makes you suicidally depressed. Then something happens. Anyway, something ends up happening where you end up encountering usually mushrooms. And if not mushrooms, maybe cannabis. If not cannabis, maybe LSD. But the point is that some spark inside of you that was initiated into psychedelic mysteries in a past lifetime, it guides you to psychedelics in this lifetime. And then the first time you try it, you're like, this is it. This is it. Oh my God, I found it. And then there's usually this like sophomoric period where like you start to try to convert all your friends onto like taking mushrooms with you, and like you say, this is the answer to all of the world's problems. And like there's actually some real truth to that in a way, but it's more complicated than that. So usually there's a spark inside of you that creates this seeking, where you go seeking. And you may not know it at the time, but what you're actually seeking is to continue your journey of initiation. Continue your journey of rites of passage and evolution into the mysteries of spiritual existence. And so you go looking for mystery centers, because in the ancient world, there was always mystery centers. If you wanted initiation, you had to go to Memphis in Egypt, or you had to go to Eleusis in Greece, or there were special places that you went in the world. And the whole function of this town was to basically be a center for spiritual initiation. And so you go seeking for places where the elders are converging. You go seeking for places where the entheogens are free and available. Maybe you're born in like the Midwest of the US, and like you had a hard time finding mushrooms. Okay, but you go seeking out mushrooms because you try to do the best. Like, let's say it's not feasible for you to go to a mecca of psychedelic initiation. You can't go to Aikidos. You can't make it to the Sacred Valley. So you do the best you can where you are. And the best you can where you are is usually mushrooms, because mushrooms are like an underground psychedelic. They can thrive they grow underground. They spread networks underground, and then they pop up their fruiting bodies, but their whole main organism is this underground network. And so this is why I started the class asking, like, okay, so who like had a really formative experience with mushrooms? Because this is really a very typical experience for Westerners for a number of reasons. One, the practical reason, it's what's available. Okay, you can't maybe make it to an ayahuasca ceremony if you're living in the middle of England or in the middle of the US or in the middle of Australia. Maybe you have some difficulty accessing these. So usually mushrooms or LSD is the first thing and the easiest thing you could find. So then what ends up happening is you get this spark reignited. You take the psychedelic and it taps you into like your ancient memory. And you're like, this feels so familiar. I've done this before. And then you feel more connected with your higher self, the part of you that survives the death of the physical body. You feel like your ancient memory gets sparked again. And you feel now that void being filled with something that is holy inside of you. So that gets you thinking like, okay, there's something really special about psychedelics. I need to keep exploring this more. I don't know why, but I need, this has the answers I'm looking for. This is what I've been looking for. But here's the thing. If you're not in a mystery center, if you're not working with elders, then you're going to be doing the best you can on your own, self-initiation on your own, doing the really honorably, the best you can with courage, with a lot of courage. But eventually you're going to hit a wall. You're going to hit a wall because you're going to have a scary experience. Or two things happen eventually if you're doing this work on your own. Either they stop working for you. Like, I used to take, 5 grams of mushrooms and it used to be this mystical experience. And now I don't even feel it anymore. I don't know what's going on. I guess I'm not supposed to do these anymore. Or you have a scary experience. Because at first, when we're young and innocent, it's like the medicine is like sentient. And it treats us like a kindly mother and a kindly father. And when we're babies, it protects us. It protects us from like the big bad world out there. But if we keep going, so our first experiences are blessed usually. They're full of grace. But we don't understand how much we're being protected by mommy and daddy. Okay? And so if we keep going and we keep getting bolder and bolder and we start to be like, yeah, I'm a psychedelic explorer. I'm a psychedelic veteran. I've done this many acid trips and da-da-da-da. And we get a little more adolescent. We get a little big for our britches. We get adolescent. Then mommy and daddy are like, okay, well, let me show you a little bit more about what's out there. And then we have an experience where we get dragged to hell and tortured by demons for hours. And we're like, fuck this. I'm not doing this anymore. This is not safe. And then we can either like stop and then do like non-entheogenic things, or we remain traumatized, we remain traumatized by that. So it's at that point that some of us go further. Some of us say, okay, I don't want to stop this because I know there's something really special here for me to find. However, I think I need elderhood. I think I need to seek out a shaman. Because in our mind and our imagination, especially as Westerners, we don't have a shamanic culture of our own because, as we've covered, the shamanic culture was hijacked by the church. So we don't have these like wise elders that can see that we're supposed to be initiated and then take us and train us and prepare us and give us the initiation and then train us in how to be of service to our culture. We don't have that, right? So we seek after this mythical idea of a shaman, but we don't have it in our culture. So what do we have to do? We have to go seeking it in other cultures that didn't have the phenomenon of the Roman Church, that didn't have like a huge multi-billion person egregore that like just like suppressed and sort of eradicated this impulse. So there's a couple directions that Westerners go in. We can go into the ancient Indian culture, because the ancient Indian culture is the oldest unbroken spiritual lineage in the world. But what's the thing about the Indian spirituality? If you trace it back, guess what it comes out of? It comes out of psychedelic sacraments, the soma that the Vedas were channeled from. So like nowadays, there's not that. So what happens is, and it's happened with all the religions, the entheogen was originally a part of the origin of it, but the dogmas have remained, the teachings have remained, but the psychedelic sacrament has been removed. So, but still something really powerful is that something that we're looking for is an uninterrupted lineage of spiritual wisdom, because we want to feel that we're connected to an unbroken chain, something we can trust. We don't have that. Like, who are the psychedelic veterans of Western civilization? People that took a lot of acid in the 70s. That one generation of like experience. And what are they connected to? Not much. They're self-initiated usually. So usually the self-initiated people, they need to tap into an unbroken lineage. So they either go to the East, to like yoga or Buddhism, or they go to the Amazon. And they're looking for the mythical ayahuasca shaman, because ayahuasca is like sparks this association in our imagination with the most powerful psychedelic, like the most intense psychedelic experience. Before we try it for the first time, what do we have in our imagination? You take it, you purge out all your demons, and then you have like a contact with extraterrestrial beings, and then you meet Jesus, and then you meet Buddha. And then like you have this like very profound life-changing spiritual experience. And so this imagination, it gets people, a certain type of people, they can go to the Eastern route, or they want to go deeper into the psychedelic path. and they want to try the holy grail of psychedelics, the ayahuasca, the holy grail. In my mind, this was like the big real deal. Like I was doing mushrooms in my basement. I was like experimenting with LSD in my basement, but I still always held in my mind, like, if I want to go to the next level, I've got to drink ayahuasca. But that's a huge problem, right? Because how are we going to go and drink ayahuasca, and like for what purpose? Like, it's not just for curiosity, like we want to seek out initiation, but we don't exactly know that's exactly what we're looking for. So this thing of ayahuasca retreat centers has really emerged in the past 20 years. So ayahuasca retreat centers are really like channeling and like using this impulse, or they're catering, let's say, catering to this impulse of Westerners that really are seeking in their deepest heart of hearts, in their soul, they're seeking really deep initiation into the mysteries of existence, like a real death and rebirth experience, like we used to have in all of these mystery schools. We're seeking a new form of initiation into the mysteries. And so this idea of seeking out ayahuasca appeals to that. But this fundamental issue with that is the guidance that's being offered, the guidance that's surrounding this initiation tradition, is not emerging out of our own civilization. And so, because what happens is you get a bunch of Westerners who go to this retreat center, and who's the shaman or who's the elder that's initiating all of these Westerners? It's some ayahuasca shaman from the Amazon who's being imported in and paid lots of money. And so they're bringing a kind of shamanic initiation tradition that emerged out of Amazonian culture. It didn't emerge out of Western civilization, because what do we have? Well, we have something, but people don't know that. People that are seeking ayahuasca, they don't realize that we have an actual psychedelic entheogenic initiation culture that was secret for hundreds of years. So because this is not commonly known, they go seeking after the mythical shaman who gets like kind of pumped up in people's imagination as some sort of like Superman that has the ability to like initiate us into the spirit world. Okay, but this is really full of dangers, because there's a fundamental flaw in this model. The fundamental flaw is the initiation knowledge for these ayahuasca retreat centers is not growing out of the culture that it's meant to serve. Because there's this evolutionary impulse in shamanism that the culture itself has its own problems. The culture itself has its own karma. And those elders that emerge out of this culture, they've received a kind of shamanic impulse that has been conditioned by the very culture that they're meant to serve. So this is a kind of shamanic law that the shamans of a culture, the shamans need to emerge out of the culture that they are meant to serve. Because what does the shaman need to do in the culture? The shaman needs to address the issues of soul loss, soul sickness, the unique conditions of that culture. If this culture is being overrun by black magic, that particular shaman needs to know how to deal with that particular kind of cultural black magic. If the culture is being overrun by alcoholism, the shaman needs to know how to deal with that particular kind of alcoholism and why that alcoholism is a problem in the first place. If the culture is being overrun by pornography, the shaman needs to know how to deal with that. If the culture is being overrun by atheism, the shaman needs to have the solution to that. And in order for the shaman to have the solution to that, he needs to be really connected to that culture and to have gone through an initiation in that same culture in order to generate the medicine within himself to treat that culture. So ayahuasca shamanism is not the product of Western civilization. It's the product of people living in the Amazon and dealing with the spiritual conditions that arise in the Amazon. So ayahuasca shamans have a connection with witchcraft or brujeria that's really strong, because there's a culture in the Amazon where shamans are competing with each other, and they're actually like engaging in spiritual warfare with each other in order to be the top healer. There's a whole culture that is not related to the unique conditions that Westerners have to face. So what happens when you get a bunch of Westerners who show up to an ayahuasca retreat center and they get served 3 nights in a row, massive doses of ayahuasca, and the person guiding the ceremony doesn't speak English, has no knowledge of what the people are coming in, bringing with them, and has no capacity to do any preparation. Remember, in ancient times, people had to be prepared for years. They had to be prepared by the person that was going to initiate them for at least a year, if not more. And then after the initiation is just the beginning. It's the death and rebirth. After that, there's a whole continued education process. So this has been the wisdom that's built up over the years. Lots of preparation from the initiator. The initiation itself goes fruitfully, and then lots of continuing education after. That model has been completely obliterated in the ayahuasca retreat center model. You show up, the shaman doesn't know anything about you, doesn't know about your culture, doesn't know about what you're coming from, isn't connected to the specific cultural ins and outs of what you're bringing, isn't connected to the specific demons that you're bringing, isn't connected to the kind of cultural sicknesses that you're bringing with you. And so you show up, and because it's a for-profit model, right? What for-profit model favors efficiency. Okay, so it behooves the for-profit models to bring in groups as large as possible and to make the retreats as short as possible and to cram as much medicine into the experience as possible and to make it highly priced so that it's highly profitable. So this has created this phenomenon that is actually very dangerous, where people show up with no preparation and they have like maybe a 7-day retreat, and it's ayahuasca every other day, if not every day. And the shaman leading the ceremony is bringing his shamanic techniques from the Amazon for these Westerners, chanting in a language the Westerners don't understand. And then that's it. They have these 3 experiences. Their head is broken open. They're initiated into the world of ayahuasca. And then that's it. Then they have to like go back to the Western civilization. And man, there's any number of things can happen after that. People can get possessed during these ceremonies. People can start to like shatter their ego and not rebuild it properly, and then go back to a sick culture, wide open, very sensitive and very porous, and then they can be tormented by all of the demonic energies that are in their culture. They haven't been educated properly. Their initiation has taken place totally outside of the context of ancestral wisdom, totally outside of the context of proper preparation and proper integration. So this is like, and now like, you know, this is not even to say anything about the shadows of the shamans that are doing this. Like what happens when you have a shamanic culture that for hundreds of years, the shamans were given everything they needed to survive. They were fed, they were given a house, and they basically worked on an Aini principle. They didn't even have money necessarily in the culture. All of a sudden, the shaman starts working at a retreat center, starts making lots of money, and then becomes the big man in their culture, becomes the alpha male, the chief in their culture. Then you have problems with the sexual shadows, right? The shaman starts taking on multiple partners, starts practicing polyamory, starts to like starts to take advantage of the Western women that are coming to the retreats. So there's this whole now shadow problem in retreat centers with sexual scandal and with money exploitation. Money and sex have now corrupted or are starting to really corrupt these centers that are just receiving lots and lots of Westerners and that are cranking out these retreats and making lots and lots of money. Did you have a comment that you want to make?
Like magic. I hear it so often people get sick of it.
Absolutely. So this is really the main issue. I mean, problems with money and sex are kind of like a symptom of the main issue. And the main issue is shamanic ethics. Like, is the shaman working for like the light, or is he working with questionable forces? And the thing is that our lineage, our shamanic lineage, what I call like the Hermetic lineage or the esoteric Christian lineage, our shamanic culture works specifically with certain forces, notably the Christ forces. The whole purpose of Rosicrucian alchemy is to do alchemy and to do transmutation in the higher bodies with the Christic energy. So that's what our shamanic tradition gives us. And the other cultures, maybe they don't have the same traditions that we have. They work with other forces. Some shamans work with demons in order to pull out demons. Some shamans work with demons. A lot of shamans actually work with demons. And they work with demons in order to heal situations with demons. So they call their demon friends to dominate the demon that's dominating somebody in their ceremony. So you have shamans that are like actually working with a very ancient form of shamanism, a pre-Christian form of shamanism. They're not working so much with the Christic light. They're working with other spiritual forces. There's lots of dimensions of the spiritual world. We don't necessarily need to work with the Christic light in order to work with the forces of the spiritual world. We can work with nature spirits. We can work with aliens. We can work with demons. We can work with tricksters. We can work with tricksters and demons. We can work with all sorts of ancient beings that are magical. They give us powers. They give us shamanic powers, but they're not connected to the Christic impulse. They're kind of doing their own thing. In Western esotericism, we would call them Luciferic beings. They're not necessarily bad. They're kind of like tricksters. They're kind of good and bad together. They operate with ethics of tricksters. Most shamans that are not working with the Christic forces are working with these middle beings that are like kind of somewhere between angels and demons. So okay, we don't have a lot of preparation going into these ceremonies, and then we're given very strong doses of ayahuasca, and we don't know what forces the shaman is working with. A lot of the times, the shaman is being infiltrated by demons because they're practicing unethically sexual behavior, and they're getting corrupted by greed. They're getting corrupted by money. The dollar is an American devil, and they're getting infiltrated by the American devil. And they don't have because this is a new introduction to their culture, they don't have their own ancestral wisdom about how to defend against this. So this is kind of like a new version of introducing smallpox to the natives. You know what I mean? Like the smallpox, like indigenous people in South America and North America, they didn't have any immunity against smallpox. And so when the Europeans came, they unleashed an absolute devastating pandemic on the natives, the indigenous peoples of North and South America. Likewise, like the shamans, they don't have any immunity built in against the temptations of money. And so they're just easily fallen prey, how fast they can get inflated and become if they're making lots of money, they're supporting their tribe, they're supporting their 2 wives and their 20 children, and they can take more women if they want because they have all the money and they're the maestro, they're the most powerful person. That is absolute breeding ground for black magic. Absolute breeding ground for black magic. So there's a situation now where Westerners are getting they have this true innocent urge to be initiated into the mysteries of existence, to the mysteries of their divine self, and the mysteries of the spiritual world. They're going and they want to heal because Westerners are all traumatized, obviously. They want to heal their trauma, and they rightfully recognize that the traumas that they experience are holding them back from fulfilling their purpose in life. It's leading to blocks, it's leading to fears, it's leading to them being sabotaged in their higher purpose. So they rightfully and courageously want to address their traumas. They want to enfrentar their traumas, which is beautiful and noble. And so, if I want to confront my traumas, I should just go deep. I should just drink the green tea or the brown tea. I should just drink the medicine. And then I'll throw out my traumas. I'll confront all my demons. I'll get exorcisms on my demons, and then I'll be good. I'll be healed. But what they're going into is a kind of a trap situation. It's kind of an ambush situation. The world that's emerging out of medicine retreats is not safe in general. To make a general rule is not safe. I'm sure there are exceptions. I'm sure there are exceptional shamans that have hearts of gold, that are reincarnated spiritual masters, that have purity, that have integrity, that have charity, that have love. And they have this innate connection to the Christic impulse. And they could probably work miracles. I'm not doubting that there are shamans that can be miracle workers, that can do soul retrieval work on people, help people heal their traumas. And these are the lights that are in the darkness. But I'm talking now about the cultural phenomenon of Westerners seeking out initiation at ayahuasca retreat centers. They're walking into a trap. And if you understand the whole long story of how Westerners have been tormented and have been, the whole Western soul has been unendingly attacked from many different angles. First, it gets attacked by the church. Then it gets attacked by the black magician secret societies. The Western civilization is currently being dominated by black magic secret societies, like Westerners that are studying black magic through psychedelics and through evil occultism. These are the people that are actually running the world right now. And so Westerners have had a rough time. Our soul has been constantly attacked. And this is like a new trap that's been set for us, and it's baited. It's okay, we get attacked by atheism and scientific materialism and a decadent, corrupt culture that leaves us feeling empty. Because of our own experiences with mushrooms or LSD, we know that psychedelics has the answer. So we go to the other side and go, okay, we're going to dive into psychedelics. And we go to the ayahuasca retreat centers, and there's a whole other demonic trap waiting for us there. And so we're kind of, the story is a kind of like similar story to what happened with New Age spirituality. New Age spirituality is another trap that's been set up and it's waiting for us. So churchianity has left us feeling empty. We say, you know what, religion doesn't have the answers. So we need to, you know what, I'm going to be spiritual, not religious. And so then we dive into like the teachings of the New Age. But the teachings of the New Age is like another subtle Luciferic trap that's just waiting there to ensnare us in fantasy and deception. So we're in this situation, and we've always been in this situation, where there's one devil on this side, and it's sending us into the mouth of another devil on the other side. So the answer can be found if we dig back into our ancestral wisdom. And this is where the doctrine of alchemy comes in. Alchemy is the closest thing we have to ancestral wisdom. It's the closest thing we have to an unbroken chain of shamanic initiatory wisdom. But here's the trick. We need to decode it because it was secret. It was secretive. It's in the special code language. It's in the special code language because the church was like actively persecuting it. So it evolved in this special code language. But if we really dig into the special code language, we can actually find a doctrine of initiation. The doctrine of initiation that works specifically with these cosmic forces, that they're symbolized by the sun and the moon. The whole doctrine of the great work of alchemy is called the magnum opus. The whole doctrine of the magnum opus is this work that we do inside our soul to achieve immortality, to achieve the philosopher's stone, to achieve the elixir of immortality. It comes about through this mysterious process inside our higher bodies where we unite the sun and the moon within us. So what does that mean? If you had to guess, what do you think that's referring to? Do you have any guesses? What does this mean, this uniting the sun and the moon in our soul? Dark and light? Yeah? Yes? Because yes, also. Dark and light? So dark and light is like a vertical polarity. The light would, I guess, be the sun, and the moon is what like reflects the light in the nighttime, right? So in that sense, the moon is like a mirror that can reflect the light of the sun in the night. So sun, day, moon, night, dark, light. That's a vertical kind of polarity. You mentioned masculine, feminine. That's a kind of horizontal polarity. So, okay, we're on to something here. The mysteries of alchemy have to do with uniting polarities. Something that has been lost is a deep esoteric appreciation of this whole concept of Christ. Because as we've covered, like the whole mysteries of Christ were hijacked and distorted. And so we've inherited a kind of very shallow understanding of these mysteries. But if you dig into esoteric Christianity, they always referred to Christ as the solar logos, as the solar logos. So in this sense, Christ could be considered a kind of solar impulse or a solar force that can actually shine into the soul and do alchemy on the soul. So our lineage, our initiatic lineage has to do with Rosicrucian alchemy. The Rosicrucian alchemists were kind of the last link in a chain of initiated Europeans. So in Rosicrucian alchemy, the sun was considered a Christic force. This was somehow related to the figure of Christ. He's like a solar being or a solar impulse that can light up the soul, that can illuminate the soul. And the moon, if the Christ is the solar logos, then the moon would be the divine mother. So you have these two kind of divinity forces that are reflected in the human soul. So there's this idea that these divinities exist out there in the spirit world, but through initiation, in particular through the taking of the sacraments, the taking of the entheogens, these forces can somehow work in the human soul and do stuff in the human soul. They can light up the human soul. They can like purify the human soul. They can heal the human soul. So the Rosicrucians, as Christian alchemists, were actually a type of shaman. They were doing work on the human soul, and this is what the shaman does. The shaman works on the soul of the person. That's the focus of shamanic healing. The wounding has taken place in the soul body, and the shaman works on the soul body and does operations on the soul body. Alchemy is like Western civilization's version of shamanism, and it works on the exact same thing. Alchemy is work on the soul body. So we have this doctrine that has been kind of compiled over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years from ancient Egypt through ancient Greece through the Arabic world back into medieval Europe, the medieval Europe back into Renaissance Europe. And it's been being developed all this time, evolved and evolved and evolved, until we reach the High Renaissance, where we look at the alchemy that the Rosicrucians developed. And this alchemy is this doctrine of the magnum opus, this doctrine of the alchemical marriage, this doctrine of the philosopher's stone. This is essentially doing in our higher bodies the equivalent of healing, illuminating, redeeming the damage that's been done to our higher bodies, and making our higher bodies immortal. It's quite simply the work of attaining immortality in our higher bodies. And who are the teachers and who are the guides, who are the master shamans of this lineage? These elusive spiritual masters that we've heard about, right? Like you've heard about Saint Germain, right? You've heard about Christian Rosenkreuz. You've heard about these so-called ascended masters, Master Jesus, John the Baptist, all of these ascended masters that we've spoken about, that there's a lot of New Age teachings about. These are considered in the Rosicrucian lineage the elders of the lineage that have actually achieved this work on their higher bodies. And they've achieved this work on their higher bodies to such an extent that they're at another level of humanity. They're at a level where they kind of have achieved what seems to be some form of immortality. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? What is your take on Bufo, 5-MeO DMT?
5-MeO DMT, it's the most powerful entheogen on the earth, and I've never done it. I think that it probably needs a lot of integration work afterwards, because you could probably have a one-time initiation experience, like a death and a rebirth experience. But it probably unleashes so much in the person that does it that it needs to take place, or it doesn't need to, but it would benefit a lot from taking place in the context of a schooling or some sort of training process. So who are the Bufo shamans? Are there? No, I mean, who are the Bufo shamans? Who are the people that are preparing people for their experience? Who are the people that are like protecting people during the experience? Who are the people that are helping to reintegrate the experience afterwards and feed it meaningfully back into the culture? I don't know. I mean, it's a desert, it's a Mexican desert entheogen, right? So I think that, like all things that are happening in the ayahuasca retreat scene, it's like, yeah, okay, let's throw in Bufo into it. So you'll do 2 ayahuascas and then a Bufo. And then you pay your bill and then you go back to your home. And like, again, it's the same thing with ayahuasca. I think it's probably dangerous if it's taking place outside of the context of a shamanic tradition. And I don't know what the shamanic tradition with Bufo is. That's not to say that people can't have the most important experience of their life with Bufo. They can take Bufo one time and it can permanently change their life. Okay? But if it's not being guided, then it's dangerous. It's the same theme. So I've been thinking a lot about this issue of the danger, about what's happening. And I'm like, okay, well, what can I do to try to solve this issue, in my own life? And so I work a lot with ayahuasca in the lineage of Santo Daime. This is my training. Santo Daime works with ayahuasca in a kind of esoteric Christian way. It's nothing like the Amazonian tradition. It's working with ayahuasca in much in the similar way that the Rosicrucians were working with mushrooms. It's working with the sun and the moon. These are the 2 kind of divine pillars that the shamans are calling and they're working with. And they're actually like doing a kind of ceremonial work with the force of the sun, the force of the moon. And this is part of the alchemy. And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, I think Westerners who want to get initiated into a kind of rite of passage, they really need to be educated in the history of their own civilization. It's not enough to just hop in and try to import the wisdom of Amazonian shamanism. There needs to be something that doesn't currently exist. Something that doesn't currently exist is a kind of like 21st century mushroom, ayahuasca, LSD, Rosicrucian, alchemical shamanism. And so this is something that I'm personally interested in exploring and cultivating. The possibilities of like doing these medicine retreats, but working within the Western lineage to do these medicine retreats. So does that exist? I'm not aware. I'm just thinking about this in the past couple of days. I've been thinking about this a lot. Somebody was asking me about like hosting a retreat. And I'm thinking, okay, if I were to host a retreat, how would I structure the retreat? And the answer that was coming to me is that education, esoteric education, needs to play an integral part of this picture so that Westerners can be prepared for what they're about to embark on, like understanding that, like, taking a psychedelic, having a death and rebirth experience, and being initiated into the mysteries of the spiritual world, it needs the preparation. So what is the preparation for that? I'm thinking the preparation is actually, like, first of all, people learning about the history of psychedelics in Western civilization, learning what has happened with the Christian church, learning what has happened with what emerged after the Christian church, learning what's happened with the secret societies that emerged after that. This is an integral part of the preparation for people that want to take part in this kind of initiation experience. But more importantly, what about the aftermath of that? What kind of training should exist for people that have maybe a week of very intense ayahuasca ceremonies, or very intense mushroom ceremonies, or very intense bufo ceremonies? Then what? How do people emerge from that properly? Like, what is the education that people should have to emerge from these initiation experiences in the most fruitful and healthy way possible? What is the integration process? What comes to mind? Fasting. Fasting in order to purify. Yeah. I think fasting is would work really well as a preparation. But after that, how do people reintegrate into Western civilization again? If you had to go, like, let's say you live in the Sacred Valley.
No.
Okay. Let's say that you were just visiting here, and you came here to do ayahuasca ceremonies, and then you had to go back to New York City afterwards. How do you take that knowledge back to New York City without going crazy?
Yeah, Andrew, it's very similar to women giving birth and having to go to work the next day. There's no what's kind of coming to my mind right now is the work of Carl Jung and the work of Joseph Campbell. These were and right now I'm watching different lectures from the University of
Esalen
yeah,
Institute.
I'm not saying it correctly.
Yeah.
But they're integrating now. They're integrating plant medicine into these kinds of programs.
Exactly.
I'm watching this, and we come from the West, so there's the psychology of it.
Exactly.
The study, psyche means soul.
Yep.
And so to read Carl Jung, the process of individuation, and the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell, these would be all pieces of literature that I would encourage people to embrace.
Well, you just hit on it. You just hit on actually the answer, because Carl Jung is playing a really, really, really crucial role in the psychedelic renaissance. His work came about 100 years early to start preparing the way. Because what Jung did, again, if you look at Jung's work in the context of the whole esoteric history, you can see that Jung actually rescued the wisdom of alchemy, and he translated it into a psychological language and came up with he repackaged alchemy in a way for Westerners to decode it and follow the doctrine, because alchemy is an actual doctrine. It's an actual coherent body of teachings. It's called the Doctrine of the Great Work, or the Magnum Opus. And Jung decoded this hidden, ciphered esoteric language, and he related it to the process of personal growth. And so now we have the wisdom thanks to Jung, we have the wisdom of the alchemists, who are all psychedelic experts, the wisdom of the alchemists in a modern, accessible language. So through Jung's teachings, we now have actual ancestral wisdom for people working with psychedelics and people going through initiation experiences. And Jung's life himself is an example. This is why I say Jung, he went through his own breakdown, his own initiation, and his own rebuilding. And that's the whole legacy of his whole career. So Jung is actually, and like I based a whole online school, I have an online school, and I based my whole online school on I wasn't even planning to talk about Jung, but thank you for bringing it up. Like, Jung is actually like a great shaman for Western civilization. Like, he's actually done a soul retrieval for the whole civilization.
And also Joseph Campbell was very...
Well, one of the things that's really useful to do is to see how Jung's doctrine of individuation and Joseph Campbell's story of the hero's journey are actually the same thing. And the hero's journey is basically accumulation of wisdom from the mysteries, because the hero is the initiate of the mysteries. And the mystery initiation follows exactly the hero's journey. You have to descend into the underworld, you have to die and be reborn. And the boon that you retrieve from the underworld is the spark of your eternal life. You bring that boon back, and then you return to the culture in the form of service. And that's the shamanic initiation, that's the individuation journey, that's the initiation into the mysteries, that's the hero's journey. It's all encoding the same process. So the hero's journey and Jungian psychology is the closest thing we have now to ancestral wisdom, but it doesn't go deeply enough, because the problem, this is where we need to integrate a more explicit, like psychedelic Jungian psychology, or like this is where we really need to tap into the hidden vaults of the Rosicrucian esotericism. Because what Jung did is he did a kind of layman's alchemy. So the doctrine of individuation is very useful to guide people in this process of reassembling their psyche when their ego gets shattered, and then they integrate all of these archetypal forces in their astral body. And then they need to go through this process of reforging an ego that integrates their unconscious. And he called that the self. Fine, that's great. What do you do when you're getting attacked by demons? What do you do when you're breaking your consciousness open to the reality of the spiritual worlds, and you're living in the middle of the United States and you're being attacked by demons? The doctrine of Jungian individuation is not going to help you at that point. At that point, you need to go to a shaman. But what kind of shaman do you go to? So what we need is like psychedelic Jungian shamans, like
The Christo impulse.
with the Christo
That's
impulse.
the Western.
That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's it. The thing that Jung taught was that the individuation process is all about uniting opposites. So light and dark, masculine, feminine, what we were talking about. This is the doctrine of alchemy. Unite the sun and the moon together. Unite the male and the female together, both within yourself, and also if you're in a relationship, you need to practice sacred marriage in a relationship too. So it's all about the uniting of the opposites. And Jung says we cannot achieve wholeness because we went on the psychedelic path in the first place to fill an empty void. Okay, emptiness, wholeness. So in order to achieve this wholeness that we're chasing after, we have to be able to integrate all these fragments together. And one fragment that we really need to integrate is the whole mystical Christ, because we've thrown that baby out with the bathwater, because we associate Christianity with churchianity. And so we were damaged and traumatized by churchianity. We usually have to go on a spiritual quest, so we go after like shamanism or Eastern wisdom. And so we have shamanism and Eastern wisdom, which is giving us a lot of meaning. But as Westerners, how can we be whole and how can we be complete if we don't reintegrate with the mystical mysteries of Christianity? So Jung speaks about alchemy, but he goes short of going into the Rosicrucian alchemy. He kind of teaches the kind of medieval alchemy doctrine, but the Rosicrucians were intensely mystical Christian alchemists. They said Christ is the sun, the divine mother is the moon. We need to unite the Christ and the divine mother within our souls in order to build the philosopher's stone. So if you get into like the nitty gritty of shamanism, and if you're getting attacked, let's say you break open your consciousness to the reality of the spiritual worlds, and you're not working with the Christ forces, and you start to get attacked by demonic forces, especially if you're living in Western civilization, like in a city, in an urban center, where you're watching a lot of TV, or you're watching a lot of YouTube, or you're getting a lot of the culture coming to you through screens and movies and TV shows and shorts and TikTok and all that stuff, and fake news and all of the propaganda. Like, how are you going to defend against that? The issue and the kind of elephant in the room is you need to somehow work with this whole huge body of spiritual wisdom represented by Christ. Like this whole idea that the Christians have, but they're fanatical about, like spiritual warfare. If you really want to tap into the conditions of the age we're living in, you cannot deny that we're living in a time of spiritual warfare, where there are dark forces that are really coming at us and trying to capture souls. In many, many different directions, there's attacks on the soul. In New Age fantasy, in psychedelic inflation, where people, they start taking lots of medicine, lots of ayahuasca, and then they start believing that they're Jesus, and they start believing that they're Mary Magdalene, and that they're going to save the world, and they have this mission to save the world. That's another danger, right? Of getting ungrounded, getting inflated, not actually building a sober ego. But then there's the other danger of brujeria, of witchcraft, of black magic that we can get attacked by. We can get attacked by that if we're working with a shaman that's working with that energy, they could put a spell on us. I've dealt with a lot of Westerners that have been cursed and hexed by powerful brujos that put a spell on them that's affecting them for 20 years. I've met people that have been dominated by a black magic curse for 20 plus years, and they're still trying to desperately shake the curse. You know, white gringo shamans that go and apprentice with some shipibo curanderos, and then the money issue comes up. The gringo shamans are making more money than the curandero. That's their maestro, and they're actually making more money. The curandero finds out about this and then starts attacking them. And then I've met some gringo shamans that have had to run away from Peru and run to Costa Rica, where there's like no indigenous tradition. It's just a bunch of gringo shamans doing their thing because they're getting their ass kicked by their maestro that has turned on them over money issues. So that's brujeria and black magic that's affecting the shamanic spiritual community. But then there's the brujeria that's affecting everybody else in the world through media and through black magic and the media and the propaganda and the culture itself. So one of the conditions that we need to face as Westerners seeking initiation, and initiation needs to address the needs the spiritual needs that we find ourselves in the time and age in which we're living. One of the spiritual needs we find ourselves in the time and age in which we're living is how do we defend ourselves against all of this demonic shit? And so you cannot find a proper answer if you do not have the whole Christ question integrated into the bigger picture. You cannot just like deal with all of this brujeria by just like envisioning a bubble of white light around yourself. I am loved, I am loved, I am loved. Yes, that can help in some way, like the way a Band-Aid can help a wound. But like this doesn't solve this fundamental existential issue of what is the role of Christ and what is the role that Christ in this whole everything that's represented by Christ in the whole bigger picture of Westerners. Westerners have this whole religion that's been hijacked and ruined and turned weaponized against us. And it's tricked us into actually rejecting the very thing that religion was meant originally to hold. And so in order to achieve this kind of wholeness and union of opposites that Jung is talking about, how to unite the opposites, it's inevitable that we have to find a way to unite again with a new form of Christianity, something that has nothing to do with the church, something that is true and lived in our own Gnostic experience. So this opens up this whole possibility of a whole new type of heretofore unforeseen, I don't even want to call it Christianity, but a kind of mysticism that incorporates Christ into the picture. So this is something that all Westerners need to address because Christianity has affected us in one way or another, if not in this life, then in past lifetimes. And so if the individuation path and if alchemy is all about uniting and healing opposites, then we need to find a way to heal paganism and Christianity, shamanism and Christianity, goddess worship and Christianity, like goddess worship and father worship.
Unbridled capitalism, profit at all costs.
All of these opposites, that's causing fragmentation in the Western soul. If we want to really achieve our potential, we need to be able to heal and unify these fragments that have been put on us. Science and spirituality, or like science and Christianity. What are some other psychedelics in Christianity, shamanism and like all of these things? Like this hasn't really been done yet, and we're following. There's a lot of traps that are in place to prevent it from happening. You talk to most people that seek out medicines, and they say, "Oh yeah, I was like raised Christian, but that was useless. I realized the priest was a pedophile, so I went in, and now I'm having a direct mystical communion with God through the psychedelic." But that is not protected. And that in the future of spiritual warfare that we're going into, I mean, in case you haven't noticed, things are getting more and more intense. And we're going forward into a future where the spiritual warfare is getting increasingly more serious. And we're not actually prepared. And I think the way to be prepared is to be initiated into a healed version of our own lineage, a healed and rectified version of our own lineage. So this has to rectify the role that Christ plays in the whole alchemical project, rectify the role that like alchemy plays in our own process of initiation and our own process of kind of neo 21st century shamanic initiation. So I'm thinking, like, in a nutshell, in order to solve this issue and in order to address the real dangers of this emerging world of ayahuasca retreat centers, and like not just even retreat centers, but people coming here, let's say here in the Sacred Valley, for example, and there's other places like Costa Rica, Guatemala, Bali. There's all these kind of like medicine power places in the world where spiritual seekers are like Sedona, Mount Shasta, like these power places where spiritual seekers are flocking to. If a Westerner does not get an initiation in a uniquely Western form of shamanism, they're not going to be well adjusted to be of service to Western civilization. So we need a kind of Western shamanic tradition, but since one doesn't exist, we need to like piece it together from the traumatized fragments of the past.
You know, Andrew, I worked many years in California prisons, and I went through probably a year of total existential crisis because I was making money off of slavery. And so, but I was a single mother. I needed to feed my child. And so every person has this friction, like how do you live in this world? And in service. And so I came up with ideas. Maybe it was Mercury, maybe it was Trickster, but I would smuggle in spiritual books. And I would smuggle in documentaries and have someone guarding the door.
That's awesome. That's so good.
I'd take all the money I made after my family and I had a roof over our head, and I would support anti-prison. I would send money to Sean, this famous activist, and I did all of these things because I couldn't marry the idea that I was profiting off of a prison industry that I didn't know anything about until I got in it. And I saw the corruption and the injustice, and I grieved, and I would smoke cannabis every day just to get through the next day. And everybody has to have that point in their life where how do you live in this world? You know, how am I contributing to the oppression of humanity? And yet I'm here, you know, like I'm in prison, and it was really
that's where you need the trickster to actually be a kind of savior figure and sneak in.
That's what
you got to sneak in light into the darkness, right?
Because I look like a little old fat white lady as a school teacher.
Yeah.
And then on the inside, behind my pants, I was carrying Joe Dispenza and I would smuggle in books that wouldn't be approved of. And that's how I managed to get through.
Yeah.
You know, and it wasn't easy.
So this is like the condition that Westerners find themselves in, where if they go and they're on the hero's journey. And the third part of the hero's journey is returning to the culture to share what you've gained, the light that you've found, the boon that you've gotten. And so we don't really have a choice if we're going back into let's say we come to the Sacred Valley, get a bunch of spiritual light, get a bunch of spiritual wisdom and some sort of initiation. And then we have to return to the United States or to England or to Australia or wherever, Europe, wherever we need to return to. We have to sneak that light into the darkness and plant it in the darkness.
I had to feed my child. I was living in a capitalist society.
Yeah. Well, that's what.
And the food wasn't free. I had to pay to put a roof over my daughter's head. You know.
Well, you're in a fine tradition of like spy shaman people, because Carl Jung did this. You know, Carl Jung had to sneak alchemical knowledge into the emerging field of psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis was emerging as this new. They were rediscovering the soul, but they just called it the unconscious. But it's basically the astral body or the soul. And so, hey, wow, what a surprise. We're rediscovering the soul in psychology. But it was very quickly going into a materialistic, atheistic, nihilistic direction. And Carl Jung had to do this shamanic hero's task because he was initiated into the mysteries of alchemy and he was like a shaman. But he knew that if he just spoke openly about mystical, alchemical, shamanic ideas, he wouldn't have been able to penetrate into the field. So he worked as a kind of spy, like an alchemist, shaman, hero spy. And he snuck his wisdom into the emerging field of psychoanalysis in a way that it could be accepted. And because he lived this kind of double agent life, he succeeded and he managed to penetrate Western civilization with his ideas. And so now, thanks to that heroic task, we can actually gain really, really valuable spiritual guidance on this initiation process from a very popular, widespread Jungian psychology. So this is exactly my point about like Shamans of a culture, they need to be initiated in the culture in order to be equipped and prepared and specialized to serve the spiritual needs of that particular culture. And so in our particular culture, spiritual knowledge is still mocked, it's still derided, it's still distorted with fantasy or called witchcraft from the church. It's dangerous territory. So one of the conditions of Western shamans is to be able to learn how to plant seeds of light in realms of darkness. That's just one of the shamanic skills that we need. Anyway, guys, I need to conclude the class now. Thank you for your presence here. Next week, I'm going to be continuing on this theme of modern day rites of passage because I've been gripped by this like really strong inspiration about like trying to like revolutionize the model of retreat centers for Westerners. So I'm kind of like working that impulse a little further.